Hello, everybody.
Hello, hello.
And long time no see. We were just backstage prepping, and I have not been able to pronounce Jen's lesson right in one go. So let's see if I can do it this time. Welcome, everybody. I can still see people coming in because I have just heard on the grapevine that Adam and Dale's session, which was the one before, is running a minute longer. So we're going to give it a minute for everybody to join, and then we're going to jump right in. Meanwhile, I can introduce myself. My name is Pragya Mishra. I am the head of marketing for RevGenius. And today I am so thrilled to present Jen. And I love the fact that you say AKA demand Jen, which is just like it makes sense, right? Welcome, Jen. Today, Jen is going to talk about how do you break through your buyer's mental spam filter. Okay, I got that. Jen, it's going to be so amazing to hear exactly. There's so much noise in the world today and so much clutter. So exactly these tips on how can we actually do that would be amazing. Over to you, Jen, and I will be in the chat if you need me.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I'm so excited to be here. I'm in a conference room in New York. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I am Jen Allen-Knuth. My nickname is Demand Jen, and I am so pumped to be talking about one of my favorite things with y'all today. So I am going to go ahead and pull up, if I can figure out how to do it. There we go. All right, let's talk about how we break through our buyer's mental spam filter. But before we do, I am from a company called Lavender. If you know it, it's a cold email writing assistant tool. And a lot of what I'm going to share today comes from a lot of the analysis we've done around what does and doesn't work as it relates to outbound in what is a very, very noisy environment. So before we can figure out how to break through a buyer's mental spam filter, first we got to figure out what is a buyer's mental spam filter, because it is not that spam filter in our emails that, saves us from getting a bunch of emails about Viagra pills. It is something completely different. So to make that point, let's figure out what it is. Now, I make the case that for many of us, our buyer is actually a lot like Liam Neeson from his character he played in the movie Taken. Now, in the movie Taken, if you haven't seen it, Liam Neeson is a dad whose daughter is kidnapped. And as you can see here, he does this really tough negotiation with the kidnapper. And he says the infamous line that says, "I can tell you I don't have money, but what I do have are a very particular set of skills I have acquired over a very long career," and like a very menacing way that I did not just deliver on, but you get the point. Now, the reason I think our buyers are a lot like Liam Neeson is for two reasons. One, most of them are telling us they don't have any money. Second is because one of the things our buyers have acquired is this mental spam filter. It's nothing they've intentionally done. Rather, it's a bit of a coping mechanism to get through all of the noise that is out there today in their inboxes, on their phones, in their DMs, you name it. So to prove that point, I'm going to have everybody participate in the chat. It's the easiest question you will be asked today. So please have some fun with me, play along. I'm going to put up a question on the next slide. And the second you think you know the answer, I want you to type it in the chat. I was going to say there are no wrong answers. There are wrong answers, but there's no penalty for a wrong answer. So give it a whirl. Are you ready for the question? Here it is. How many of these 10 emails on the screen are cold emails? I'll give you a second because I can't see the chat. I'm going to trust and faith and believe that you're in there. Okay. The answer is all 10. Now, if you haven't picked up already, this is actually a screenshot of my inbox from a couple months ago. I am not some big wig C-level executive, right? It's not like I'm one of you, if you're on here, that gets thousands of these a day. However, when we talk about the mental spam filter, what it essentially is it's a way to see very quickly, without even looking at the email itself, is this a sales email or not? So there's a ton of cues we can actually spot out. And this is exactly what our buyers do. First one, my name. You see in several of these emails, it's got my name in there. Do we do that when we send emails to colleagues? No, we assume because it's being sent to Jen knows it's for Jen. This is very common in spam or sales, uninvited sales emails. Number two, emojis. Sometimes we send emojis in our internal emails and our emails to our friends, but more often than not, we don't do it in business communication. Yet it happens all the time in sales emails because we're trying to be cute. Third, look at how almost every single one of these emails starts when you look at the preview text. The preview text is never getting as much shine as the subject line. It's this. It's what an executive sees when they look at their inbox in total. Every one of these starts with some form of I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to send you a last note. I emailed you about our practice. I hope Q1 was great. I hope you're doing great. I've tried emailing, right? We get the point. So much of the decision to delete an email comes from our buyers looking at emails the same way we're looking at my inbox right now and saying, this sounds like it's someone who wants my time. And so when we look at the mental spam filter, for those of you that don't know this guy, this is one of the co-founders of Lavender, Will Allred. He's the one that came up with this concept of the mental spam filter. What it tells us is most emails are actually deleted within 3 seconds. Buyers are doing exactly what we just did right there. They're not opening them one by one. They're looking at it and saying, this looks like spam to me. If we are lucky enough to get past that 3 seconds and we get the open, the average email reading time from a buyer is 9 seconds. 9 seconds is about 50 words. Now, in my time at Lavender, when I was managing the community growth team, there were hundreds of cold emails I reviewed, hundreds. 2 of them were less than 50 words, which is exactly how many words you have to get to in 9 seconds. So part of the problem here is even if we're trying to personalize and be relevant and do all these great things we've been taught to do, on average, we are still typically dumping the kitchen sink on our buyers. And we do that for a very valid reason, because we are often very unsure of what works. So you want a case study? Here you go. You want a list of 7 problems we solved? Here you go. You want all the awards we won? Here you go, right? And our hope is if I can say the right things, I will impress you enough to take a meeting. But I think what we've seen and what we will continue to see is the number of companies in this space explode, the number of emails that people send explode, is it's just not working, right? This old math formula of I just need to send more and do more has diminishing returns. And I think that's what many of us are feeling right now. So the key here is how do we show up differently such that we break out of that mental spam filter? We're not one of those emails that gets deleted right off the bat from our buyer. So in order to do that, first we got to think like a buyer. This is research that I spent 18 years as an AE. When I saw this research, it completely changed my opinion around what my role was and what I should be doing with my time. And essentially all this tells us is that 83% of the buying group's time is spent without us, the sellers. Now, if you're looking at that 17% saying, hey, that's not that bad, here's the bad news. That is meeting with potential suppliers. So if we are lucky enough to be one of 3, that's still only 5 to 6% of their time. Now, when I first saw this, my first reaction was like, well, how do I make that 17% or that 5 or 6% bigger? And then I realized I was actually asking the wrong question. The question I should be asking is, what's happening inside of the 83% and how can I be helpful there? So instead of how do I get more buyers to come to me, the question is, how do I show up in the places where buyers are going to learn? But the reality is so often we are just wired as salespeople to be like, I'm going to pitch you and find you no matter where you are. If it's LinkedIn, if it's a gift I'm sending, if it's a cold call, it's a cold email, like I'm just going to find you and I'm going to pitch you. And I think as we head into 2020, the balance of 2023 and 2024, we've got to kind of put that aside for a second. Because big theme for today and tomorrow is all about community. And I would argue that right now we are in one of the most fortunate times to be a salesperson, although it might not feel like it, because so much of our buyer's learning journey is happening out loud. Think about it. I'm at a conference today with about 100 heads of sales. They're all here to learn. If you Google Slack communities for CIOs, you will see a list of places where CIOs are asking each other questions. Learning is happening out loud in communities if we choose to listen. And so there's a couple questions we have to ask ourselves. First and foremost is, do we actually know the answer to where do our buyers, the influencers within those organizations and end users go to learn? It is okay if you do not know the answer to that question now. 2 very quick things you can do today that will help you get there. One, I mentioned this a moment ago, Google Slack communities for CXOs, whatever, stakeholder you sell to. I did this the other day for a ton of different titles just to make sure that this wouldn't be like a bad idea. And for every single title, some sort of Slack community article came up. I am not suggesting you join those communities and then pitch those people. What I am suggesting is it's a great way for us to learn the acumen, the language that they use. What are they talking about? What trade-offs are they thinking about? We can be a shadow learner in those instances. Second one is Google virtual events for CXOs. Again, whoever you sell to. And then start looking at the topic titles. If you look at today and tomorrow at RevCon, just by looking at the session titles would give you ideas of what topics sales leaders are willing to come together on. It's the same for HR, CIO, CFO, you name it. So start going and looking at these things, not with the intention to sell, but with the intention to look at how our buyers are learning, what they're learning about. It will give us great cues to what might be relevant. Then, second question here is, what are they seeking to learn about? Now, as salespeople, for a long time, it was enough for us just to know about our option, what our option for a solution is. But I would argue if we are going to earn attention in that land of the 83%, we actually have to broaden what we are capable of learning about. So buyers go through this path. It's not like buyers, we know this, buyers don't wake up and say, I want to buy something today. Buying is terrible. Most want to avoid it. Instead, what they say is they have this moment where they say, do I actually have a problem? Let me do some research and see if this is big enough to solve. How big is this problem? If I'm going to hold my hand out to a CFO, I got to be able to prove that it's a problem worth solving. The third question, can I actually get away with ignoring it for now? This is status quo. Can I kick the can another 6 months so I don't have to deal with this? Right? It's a very real question. And then if not, what are my options? And within that, our option is one. But buyers, if we are only able to fulfill a information request around what we do, we better hope we have the cheapest product, the best performing product, the best skills in the world, which is really, really difficult. So instead, my point is the 83% is happening here. And it forces us as salespeople to think differently about our conventional beliefs around what's marketing's job and what's my job. Because I will tell you, if you can help aid your buyers learning in sizing the problem or helping them consider alternatives to you at status quo, buyers are going to pull us in earlier and we become part of that 83%. If you don't believe me, this is kind of the opinion of that buyers hold about us today, which is, if you look at this is research from Gong that came out in March of a study they did with 600 buyers. What this plain and simply tells us is buyers feel that overall, most sellers don't understand the buyer's role. That's the lowest possible bar we can have. Most sellers that are reaching out to them are not addressing a relevant challenge. The message isn't personalized. It's clearly a button push, and I'm not learning anything from the seller. When we think about buyer and seller relationships, buyers, we know this, they don't love just wasting time with us salespeople. They only want to spend time with salespeople when they perceive there to be an information and insight gap, meaning you salesperson knows something I don't that I need to know in order to make a good decision. If this is our current state, we could sit here and be depressed about it, but I would actually argue this is our opportunity. This is our white space, because if you can show up differently here, that is an opportunity to differentiate yourself early. So how do we do that? Something called observation hunting. Now, observation hunting is simple in theory, it's tough in practice, and it is something we have to practice. If you look at the vast majority of the emails I had up on the screen and the vast majority of emails that we sent, I've sent them too, we tend to take a motion where we say, here's who we are, here's why we're great at it, do you want some time to talk about it? The idea behind that is to say, let me impress you with what we do, hoping you're interested and want some of it. We've seen that as an overused motion. And so instead, when we think about observation hunting, what we want to be able to fill in the blank for is this. I saw this observation about the company or the executive, and I thought a problem might be occurring as a result. Now, the word might is underlined for a reason, because no matter what, we could do all the research in the world, we are still living outside of the four walls of our prospect and our customer. So we have to be very intentional with our language to frame it as unsure. One of the most off-putting thing we as salespeople do in emails is talk at our buyers. And often that comes from a place of believing that, having the utmost confidence that they need us is what turns buyers on. In reality, it actually turns buyers off, because it's like a stranger walking into your home and then saying, I think the paint color you chose on the wall is pretty ugly, or calling your baby ugly, right? So we've got to be very careful about how we phrase this. It looks like this might be occurring as a result. And when doing this motion, our job here is not to say this is why our solution is the best. It is to first and foremost align on, is there even a problem worth solving? And logically, we sit there, it's like, well, of course that's the first step, but we skip it all the time because we believe if we waste a piece of communication and we don't ask for the call, we're not going to convert that buyer. When in reality, I think many things in sales benefit from us slowing down. So the job number one is to create curiosity on a potential problem without actually really talking that much about us. So here's how you do it. First and foremost, again, this sounds so stupid simple, but it's rarely done. We have to explicitly define the business problems that customers use us to solve. And the key here is to go beyond the surface. If I was saying let's say I sell forecasting software, what business problems does my customer use me to solve? Inaccurate forecasts is the most surface level answer to that. What we are solving for is a much bigger problem, but oftentimes we are so used and wired to just saying the thing that we do. So think about it in layers. What happens when there's an inaccurate forecast? What happens when that is submitted to the board? What happens to that CRO when they need to defend it? What happens to the person who's using the manual spreadsheet to create it? Right? We have to live and breathe like our buyers do, which means taking a much deeper look. Second, what observations, events, triggers might suggest someone has that problem? This is like a big trap I fell into when I was a seller, which is I would look at my territory by demographics. I would say, okay, what's the companies in my territory that have the most number of salespeople that I can get the biggest deals with? And I actually wouldn't reflect that much on, is there any evidence to suggest that they have the problem that we solve? So what I'm suggesting here is we need to actually map that out. Is it, when I was working at Lavender, it might actually be if there was a layoff in an organization, that might be a trigger event, because that might signal, hey, if they're laying off 25% of their team, maybe their approach to outbound isn't returning great results. So their belief or assumption is we need to kind of reduce the amount of money we're spending on it. This is why the language of maybe and might is so important, because we can't be certain. We can only make our best guess. So thinking beyond just the obvious demographic fits and looking at, are there observable things we can find about these prospects that would indicate the degree to which they feel that pain? And then lastly, then looking back at our top priority accounts and saying, do I actually see any evidence? It is hard to deprioritize a company that demographically looks awesome. But this is where many of us lose a lot of our time and productivity, is we're so convinced, or we're so occupied with convincing people that they have a problem. Often we leave really good fit opportunities out there who have evidence that they have a problem. So observation hunting is something that takes more time than just pushing a button, plain and simple. But we can only push a button so much and be happy with 0.1% reply rates before we realize there's no amount of volume that's going to solve for that. So here's a framework, because I don't want to just kind of teach in theory. I want to kind of bring it together. Now, this is not the world's best cold email. I'm not saying it is. I just want to give you one example of how this comes together. This is a busy slide in case you want to take a picture. So I know it's wordy, but that's why I'm doing it. So as you look at this email, this is, by the way, this is the Lavender coach that's coaching you instead of having have somebody else read your email and give you their opinion. So a few things I'll call out. Subject line, 1 to 3 words. This is where so many good emails go to die. We put 5 words, we put names, we put 10 times ROI, we put all these things in there, and all they are is red flags to our customer that this is a sales email. You actually want to be intentionally boring, because think about it. That's what our internal emails look like. So Acme Community is the subject line. It's intentionally boring. Then we don't say, my name is so-and-so, and I'm from this company, but nobody cares. They can look at my signature if they want to know that information. Lead with the observation, and here's why. Remember our screenshot in the beginning? That preview text is exactly what that buyer sees before they open the email. So we always overthink the subject line. We rarely overthink the preview text, but it is really important. If they see that this person has taken an interest in them, they are much more likely to open that email. So this observation is, I noticed you're 6 months into your community growth job at Acme. Now we're going to use that unsure tonality and hypothesize a potential roadblock. Roadblock is, I looked at Acme's website, I couldn't find an actual community. So that's a 1 + 1 = 3 moment. If you're head of community, but there is no community that you manage, maybe you're stuck weighing the pros and cons of it, right? And that's where we're seeking an informed question. Lastly, social proof. This is not to say Alpha bought our community management software and returned a 10 times ROI. They're not there yet. They're still learning. What we are saying is Alpha was in a similar boat, and then we're offering something of helpfulness to their learning journey. Would you want to take a look at what they use to help them decide? This is not about pitching a call on our solution. This is not about 30 minutes with me. This is about saying, I'm an outsider. I'm looking in. I have a hypothesis. I might be wrong, but I want to be helpful to you. And that's what I mean by leaning our outbound towards the direction of learners, not just hand raisers. So the very best part of all of this is one of the toughest things when we lead a sales call is sometimes it's really awkward to start it, right? Because you're like, what do I talk about? So what do I default to? Let me show you our product. Let me ask you a couple of qualifying questions. What we've done is we've freed up that awkwardness. Now, because if a buyer said yes to that email, I can go into that call knowing this is someone who's on the fence around do we or do we not build a community for our users. So I can go into that call and ask questions about that. How are you thinking about it? What's in the pro column? What's in the con column? Interesting, because what we saw from another company was they were debating this and this. And you become part of that 83% without making it awkward on that first call. So we all know we're not supposed to be product-led in our calls, but in reality, it's really hard to do when our cold emails are teeing us up to talk about that. Now, a few things before we wrap up here. I'm going to share 2 slides with 6 stats on them. These are stats that I think go against a lot of what we've been classically taught as it relates to cold email, and that's why I've picked them. Number 1, this is all sourced from Lavender's data, which is millions of data points around cold email. Number 1, length. 50 words or less in an email will increase your response rate by 83%. By and large, it's the single most important thing you can do as it relates to cold email. If you do nothing else, just do this. And the reason this is I talked about it before, it's really hard to write a 50-word email. Some of you might sit there and say it's impossible. I've worked with a ton of sellers that did. It's not impossible. It simply requires extreme clarity of thinking. It requires that we know exactly what we are trying to do and say in that message, and we're not doing the kitchen sink problem. So 50 words or less plus mobile optimized, which means most of our buyers, in many cases, read their emails on their phone. So big blocks of text looks like high effort. So spaces in between your sentences, there's a reason you see people doing that. It's because you're earning the right to each next sentence. Second stat, clarity. This one is so hard. It's another one that's I see sellers get tripped up. I got tripped up when I was a seller. Clarity is simply saying you will increase your reply rate by 67% if you write at a 3rd to 5th grade level. That means get your 9 to 11-year-old cousin or son or whoever to read your email. If they don't understand it, you got a problem. When I started writing in Lavender, I was writing on average an 11th and 12th grade reading level. And the reason I was doing that is because I was flexing all of my big fancy buzzwords. Visibility, not really a sexy word, but you don't have to say visibility, you can say see. So look for these long syllable words and cut them out, swap them for simpler, more direct language. The last one on this page, a PS. Many of us have always believed I know I need to be personalized, but it's so awkward. How do I start off with saw you went to Penn State and then transitioned into my expense management software? It's weird. Buyers feel it too. We call that forced personalization, when you say a line to make them think it's relevant and then they realize they just tailored the first sentence. So when you have something that is uniquely personalized, put it in the PS. Here's why. Only 4% of sellers do this right now. Will it become a trend? Maybe, but it gets you a 26% increase in your reply rate. And the reason for that is when an executive looks at their email, they're looking at the subject line, the preview text, then they drop down to the bottom. And so if they see something like, saw you've got, you volunteer with the animal shelter, my 2 dogs are rescues, love to see it. You're showing that person you are a human being, and this is an email of 1-to-1. So it's a great opportunity to use your personalization. The last few things here, tone, personalization, and question. We already talked about tone. Using an informative tone where you are talking at your buyer will reduce the likelihood of a reply by 28%. If you're sitting there saying personalized emails, they don't work, 1,200% increase in reply rate. That's almost ridiculous to even say. That is up from 100% for emails that are automated versus personalized. And then lastly, be careful of the number of questions you ask. 1 or less is ideal. The more questions you ask, the more complicated it is for the buyer. So after today, what do we do? A couple things. Mirror your buyer's learning journey. Try, if you haven't already, Googling Slack communities for the CXO that you sell to. Try Googling virtual conferences. Look at the titles and start observing what your buyers are learning about and where they're learning about it. You can learn so much from just being a fly on the wall and seeing what they're asking and talking about. Number 2, the goal here is relevance over everything. Personalization is great. And when you've got a strong personalized motion, fabulous. But at the end of the day, if the email is not relevant to a business problem, it's probably going to be difficult to convert that into a meeting that then converts into a sale. So practice this motion of getting better about what is the business problem we actually solve, the layers of it, not just the surface. And then what are those observations, events, or triggers that suggest someone might have that problem? Because that's where you do start to get scale. We can start to look at things like if we've seen a reduction in force, if we've seen a particular type of investment. And then that allows us to make this not a one-by-one motion. So if you're sitting there saying, hey, I'm a little worried about the state of my cold emails, or maybe I'm not sure, maybe I think mine are fine, that's okay. You can download Lavender, you can try it for 7 days, and what you can use it to do is not just to help you write better emails, but actually just take a current state assessment. What is my email getting scored? Is it a 90 or above, which is where we want to be, or is it down lower? If it's down lower, that might be a reason to reconsider the motion that we've been using to cold email. Number 2, if you're sitting there saying, okay, I want to lean into this, but I need some help, Lavender houses a ton of different cold email frameworks on the website. These are not fill-in-the-blank templates. These are examples, but structural frameworks that give you an idea of how do I basically line up my emails. So you don't have to be a Lavender customer. It's all free. You can access it. And then if you're into kind of like a more entertaining point of view, Lavenderland is where we house all of our kind of like Netflix-esque type content where we do a ton of different cold email challenges. It's kind of just like a more fun way to learn about it. So if you're into that sort of thing, you can see the link there. So with that said, I think we've got 1 minute left. How's that for time management? So as I had mentioned, or maybe I didn't mention, if you did have questions, because we're short on time, I'm happy to answer them afterwards. So please take the last minute to put them in the chat and I will respond one-on-one after the event.
Thank you so much, Jen. I really feel bad because you missed the party in the chat. It was on fire. We were having a blast in there. So of course, I'm going to send you the script later and you can actually go. It's great with some popcorn.
Thank you everybody for being with us today. I so appreciate your time and tuning in for this.
Thank you so much, everybody. I want to just take a second to tell you all that there's going to be a speed networking. So all of this thing that's happening in chat, you can actually meet each other and just bump into each other every 2 minutes, get a new person, say hello. So it's going to go on for 30 minutes, join the session, and maybe also add a picture to your little name. So instead of just first name, last name, alphabets, you can actually see the face. Just a tip. All right. See you in the networking session. And thank you so much, Jen.